I think even just building your product with internationalization in mind from day one is a great win. If you internationalize from day one, it's far cheaper and more time efficient if doing it that way than retrofitting it later. I know that for sure.
Hello and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, product localization, and global expansion. I'm Caterina from Undertow. We help B2B SaaS companies grow in any language. Today, our founder, Nicola Calabrese, will be talking with Melanie Heighway, Head of Product Internationalization at Atlassian. Melanie leads a team responsible for ensuring that Atlassian's products are available in over 20 languages, working closely with engineers, content designers, UX designers, and product managers to integrate globalization into the product development cycle. In this episode, we will explore common myths about localization, the impact of AI on business processes, and strategies for scaling localization effectively. Whether you are a SaaS company just starting your global journey or looking to optimize your existing processes, this conversation is packed with valuable insights. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Hi, Melanie, and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing?
Good. And today we're going to talk about a lot of things related to localization, product localization, AI a little bit. But before we jump right into the topic, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself and your role at Atlassian?
Sure. I'm head of Product Internationalization at Atlassian, and my team is responsible for ensuring that Atlassian's products are available in 20 plus languages. My team actually localizes over 30 different products and platform areas, and we work very closely with software engineers, content designers, UX designers, and product managers. I'm specifically responsible for driving our internationalization and localization strategy and scaling our operations in tandem with Atlassian's growth. And this often involves influencing and driving teams to include globalization into the product development lifecycle from the outset rather than treating it as an afterthought.
When people talk about localization, a common assumption is that you can simply just translate the content. That's enough for international markets. But what are some of the biggest myths that you've encountered about localization, and how do they impact global expansion strategies?
Yeah, I think I could call out 3 myths that I see a lot. One of the most pervasive myths is that international product experience is solely the responsibility of the localization team. In reality, for a product to succeed globally, as all teams involved in the product development lifecycle need to consider globalization from the start, it's not simply enough to translate content from one language to another. It needs to be locally relevant. Additionally, product engineering and design teams need to really provide enough context about where the strings are going to appear in the UI to ensure that translators can actually localize strings correctly. And this isn't the localization team can or should do simply on their own. So that would be the first myth that I come across a lot. The second common misconception would be that poor translation quality is solely a localization issue. Often translation quality issues arise from inadequate internationalization practices such as concatenation, hard coding, or failing to internationalize time and date settings. If you have robust engineering practices, you can ensure high quality localization is actually possible, and that will also ensure a strong product experience across all markets. And thirdly, I would say that there is also a tendency to assume that all international markets behave like the US market, which we know in our industry is simply not the case. Australia is also a great example of an English-speaking market that behaves slightly differently to the US, but this is magnified in markets where English is an official or primary language. It really leads to the strategic missteps, and each market has unique preferences and nuances, and this differs from localized support to even data residency and pricing. And understanding those differences are really key to being successful with your global expansion.
And everybody's talking about AI and how that's making a big impact. Some people are saying we don't need translator anymore and other things like that. But what are actually some of the most practical ways that AI is enhancing localization process, especially in B2B SaaS context like Atlassian? And can you give us some specific example of this?
Yeah, AI is revolutionizing our industry, and it's not just through AI translation, but it's also through streamlining and enhancing our localization workflows. At Atlassian, we're applying AI to localization workflows in a few different places. Firstly, we actually leverage AI for context gathering to provide enough context to our translators for our short software strings, which is very essential. So AI really enables us to quickly and accurately provide translators with context that they need. We use our own products, Confluence, Jira, and Bitbucket, and we're actually able to use powerful AI queries and prompts to obtain context and even details of original string authors through AI, and in a process that would have previously taken 3 times the amount of time it takes now through using AI. AI is really good at helping us identify very quickly the root cause of localization issues, such as if there's errors in complex nested plurals, for example. It significantly reduces the amount of time and effort that we need to resolve or diagnose these issues. And this would have normally taken us a lot longer time or block of bullet back and forth with engineers. Thirdly, and one area that I'm particularly excited about, is that we're experimenting with using AI to parse developer strings to create individual developer notes with the strings that we hand to the translators to provide detailed context. So this basically parses the string file and looks at the key ID and the surrounding strings for context and creates, through a very detailed, specific prompt, a developer note that's really useful for translators to understand where that string will be used in context, which is actually far greater, higher quality than human developer notes in many cases. When you think of it, most developers tend to think that these developer notes are written for other developers, but in actual fact, they're written for translators. And so AI enables us to actually get the developer note written in a way that we need it, and we can specify that. As the holy grail of our industry is also trying to provide enough context. So I'm really keen, our team is really keen to see how we can tap into AI to help facilitate that as well.
Yes, just to clarify a bit. So what you're talking about is using AI to get like notes for every single string that the translator can, when they are translating the string, because one of the issues obviously is that a lot of times they just see a string of text. They have no idea where it's sitting. Maybe if it's good, if they're lucky, they got a screenshot, but they have to locate where the string is sitting. In some translation management system, you can actually see that string like dynamically changing when you translate. But still, like, understanding the notes is useful to understand what that, let's say, when you click that button, what's going to happen, what is relating to. Is that correct, right?
That's right. So with software, it's a little bit more provide dynamic context like you can if it's a website or a CMS. And so in lieu of that, we do actually have systems that can provide dynamic context, but it takes a lot of manual time to troll through the UI to capture that. So dev notes can be really a more powerful tool in terms of saving time, but also in terms of being able to add a lot of information. What we tend to find is, though, say, for example, you've got the word cancel, and this word is going to be used on a button, a cancel button. Sometimes we find the developer note, my human developer might say something like cancel button, but it obviously, when you're translating it, like, well, what am I canceling? What is the effect of this cancel? We can actually, use the context of the full file, like, okay, this is on a billing screen. This will be shown to the user when the question blah, blah, blah is asked. Do they want to proceed or do they want to cancel? And it's far more rich and provides far more information, sometimes more information than what you could actually get from a dynamic screen. But sometimes these screens are quite limited and very short with limited text. So through using the whole context of the full string file, you can actually gain more context in the dev note through that.
Yeah, because I was wondering, like, traditionally, let's say before AI, what kind of like reference material will translator have access to? Would it be like let's say a Figma mock-up with the actual flow of the screens or user stories? Or what did you use to before? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really evolved over time. When I started, it was very much using Figma files and staging environments. We're still using staging environments. Back then, it was taking a screenshot of the staging environment. Now it's utilizing dynamic context through, instrumentation of strings that enables the product to actually show to the translators while they're localizing it. But as I said, that is still very time consuming because you need to go through the flow of the UI for where that string shows to capture it and have it show to the translator. So whilst it's got faster, we could take that further and look into some of the great developments that are happening with AI, where AI can actually control your system and go through flows and, all scary, also very powerful to do things like go through a testing workflow, for example, which is really useful for testing localization, but it's also really useful for capturing English screens that provide us context.
Yeah. I mean, that could be useful. And I was wondering if you have tried or you're planning to try, because once you have such a wide context for each string, if you try maybe getting, let's say, the first draft translation done by AI by leveraging the context of the string as well, is there something you're really trying or planning to try?
I'd love to see AI translation going in that direction. We're starting our journey and investigating different types of LLMs, AI translation. Some of the providers I've spoken to have said there's not the ability just yet to use surrounding information for context, but where you can actually kind of train AI to get better with, I guess, taking into account context is having that human in the loop and doing a post-edit review that will ensure that the context is incorporated and the AI trains and improves on that. I'd love it to be a possibility. At the moment, I'm not aware that it's possible for AI to look at the content, at least for looking at dev notes. It would be wonderful if that could be the case, looking at dev notes, looking even at key IDs. We often have, key IDs that are named after the location of the string and what it does. So that's also very useful. At this date, we don't yet have a way to do that.
We're not there yet. And actually, I was wondering, another thing that I wanted to ask you, that's exactly what you mentioned already, like human in the loop, like how do you balance AI and human expertise, especially because, I mean, there is still like some skepticism around the quality generated by AI. Even in translation, you might get the infamous hallucinations as well. So it's interesting, like how do you manage that? How do you find this balance between, let's say, AI and humans?
Yeah, we really aim to complement rather than replace human expertise. In our localization team, we're very deliberate about how we integrate AI into our workflows, and we primarily use AI for gathering and providing information to translators. We're very careful that if we use any AI translation workflows, we always have a human in the loop. And we're also currently investing time into researching the performance of different LLMs for AI translation within language sets as well, just to keep up to date with how AI translation quality is tracking in our industry, the advancements. We know it's very different across different LLMs. So that's something that we are actually investing time into currently to investigate.
Sorry to interrupt your listening, but do you want to grow your B2B SaaS in international markets? Because every country is different, and what users value in one market doesn't necessarily matter in another one. At Undertow, we help B2B SaaS companies like yours succeed in their international expansion. We create customized localization strategies that address the unique challenges of each market. In this way, you can effectively attract, engage, and convert customers worldwide. Visit undertowlanguages.com to find out more. And now back to the show. And for example, at the moment, do you see like different, let's say, performance differences among languages? Like some, let's say, set of languages that perform better for AI, some that maybe are not doing that well, so there's more like human involvement that side?
Yes, we definitely are. We don't use AI translation workflows on all content at Atlassian. We have a broad range outside of software localization. We've also got a website, email, support content as well. But we have noticed from the trials that we've run over the last couple of years, we definitely see that different languages perform better with AI. Some to a point where it's like, it's not quite there yet, where using humans would actually be, and leveraging TM would be actually faster, better. But yeah, we're definitely seeing that there's still some differences, but I have to say that the gap is closing fast. It's getting more and more powerful, and we're making strides, and the quality is improving drastically, particularly in the last 1 year, 1.5 years.
And you mentioned you use different workflows for different kind of content, like you said, email, website, and product. So how did your workflow change? Let's say reducing or introducing more human intervention across the different kind of contents. How did it change in the last year?
I guess it changed in terms of, we do our financial planning, and so we tie our strategy and our roadmap to the financial year. And throughout that, we might actually pilot different approaches as a new year approaches. So we're actually in the process of doing that right now, actually, with one of our workflows. With the marketing localization team, they have done a lot of pilots and research into this and actually based on the findings of those experiments, actually applied workflows in different ways across different content and different languages. So basically through testing it and refining it as they go along. We are a little bit later to adopt AI translation. And when I say we, I mean the product localization team. And that's purely just because, as we know, software localization is much harder with often just one word, lots of placeholders and whatnot. We know that is harder content to localize with AI. So we are a little bit slower getting there, but at the same time, it's going to be through doing pilots and kind of refining from there, tweaking from there.
And another thing that is, I think is really crucial for product localization is the testing part. So is that something that you found as anything that you do differently now that you were doing like a year ago, or how do you approach that?
That's a great question. It would be great as AI evolves if we could use more AI for testing. We're not quite at a point yet where we could do that. It's still with humans doing the testing. I think one way that I have noticed in the 6 years that I've been at Atlassian that quality testing has changed across localization is that we've moved more to a bug blitz kind of model before we do feature or product releases, and we involve the engineering team, and we both involve them in doing the localized QA, localized app QA, but also build that into the English QA process so that it's done in tandem, and it gives them more empathy for the localization issues as well, and gives them more motivation to involve us in the QA. So I can definitely say that's changed and improved, and I'm seeing more of these regular bug bash situations for new features and products. But yeah, as I said, I'm very excited to see going forward how we can use more automated forms of testing.
Can you clarify a little bit, as you said, the two different approach between bugs and features?
Between bugs and features, there's a joke in that. Between features and products. So I guess it depends on how large the feature is. Sometimes a feature can be as large as a product, in fact, actually. And in some cases, you actually see features turn into products later on. So really, it just has to do with the size and the scope of that feature. Typically, we will, for any new product, we'll do a localized quality check beforehand and definitely a bug blitz, but we will do that for larger features as well because they do quantify that in terms of the magnitude and the volume of the feature.
And when you test a feature, do you have like specific scenarios or user stories that you follow, or how do you approach that kind of testing?
Yeah, we do often use user stories, in fact, or we follow a workflow of open the app, try to do this action, and it will have a flow that we'll follow through, and we'll often do it simultaneously together, have a meeting and just run through a flow. And then kind of literally is a bug bash where you're in a room together doing it, and it works really well that way. Also have systems set up so you can automatically report it straight away. But yeah, it usually happens going through a flow and then reporting it, sometimes having an integration with a Jira project to automatically report it as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you use Jira for bug tracking.
We definitely do.
And another thing that I want to ask you is, let's say, the budget, the cost and investment in localization. So especially when you're scaling, how do you justify the investment to stakeholders, and what metrics or example do you use to show the tangible return on investment of localization effort? Because I know like return on investment for localization is like the holy grail. Nobody can really like put the finger on it exactly. But how do you usually basically show to stakeholders that it's worth investing in localization, especially when scaling up?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit of a different story when you're scaling up as opposed to the size of where Atlassian is today. So I take that into account with my answer, but I think justifying the investment in localization really requires a really strategic and planned approach. You need to start by quantifying market opportunity and ensuring that you have really robust data tracking processes in place so you can really measure that before and after target point, and make sure that everybody, your stakeholders and your localization team, is very aligned on what the realistic goal is that you're striving for, and making sure you're really aligned on what success looks like when you're branching into a new market, because people might have a different idea. For some teams, that might be like, oh, if we localize, we'll increase by this amount of revenue. Other people might be like, I'm trying to drive engagement. So you need to really align on that and understand if localization will really move the needle on that before you put the investment in. It's also really important to analyze market trends and look at local competitor localized offerings as well. Also pricing strategy before you launch as well to make sure there's no blockers there. It's also important to note that sometimes the initial engineering effort and time needed can be costly in terms of externalizing and internationalizing streams. And that should also be weighed up in the process, because sometimes localization is actually cheaper, smaller in cost in comparison to the actual engineering effort. So that's something, again, having everyone in the room, making sure you're aligned on what success looks like, what you're trying to achieve, and whether localization is the way to do that is important.
Yeah, and I think that's what the point you mentioned about internationalization and the engineering cost possibly being higher than the localization cost. I think it's a one point for like stressing to involve localization at least earlier, or at least try to like develop a more, let's say, global product. So absolutely not hard coding strings, and thinking already like about some of the things that you mentioned, right? Like concatenating strings and things that might work in English, which is usually the language I use, but might not work in others. Taking into account plurals, that it doesn't work the same in all the languages. The plurals, there's not only two plurals. It things that maybe if you're working in localization for a long time, it's a given, but it's not always like that, because I know like engineers have to think about so many things. So, and any recommendation, like to make the point to include localization earlier in that case, if there's anything that you think might be useful, maybe you're already like in a couple of markets, but then they might think, let's say European languages, and the company might think about going to other markets. And then you start to going, let's say, more technically challenging one, like let's say right to left languages or Asian languages with different scripts. Any recommendation on how maybe, or suggestion how it would be good to position localization earlier so it's involved in these conversations and that's taken into account when thinking about expansion?
Yeah, I think even just building your product with internationalization in mind from day one is a great win. Obviously, just because you've externalized your streams doesn't mean that you're ready to launch in new markets. It takes more than that, as you said. Developers have a lot on their mind when they're writing code. They're not always thinking like, oh, how am I going to handle this if it's multiples or if it's a singular? And we don't usually learn that's a problem until we get the strings. We're like, okay, so it's great that you've externalized the strings. We're going to need a bit of work to improve localizability. But yeah, if you internationalize from day one, it's far cheaper and more time efficient if doing it that way than retrofitting it later. I know that for sure. It can be challenging with, I know, for example, so we have a product called Whiteboards, which is literally like a whiteboard with sticky notes. And that uses a slightly different internationalization framework because we're using graphics. So that was challenging in terms of supporting double byte characters for CJK, Chinese, Japanese, Korean. Just because the strings were externalized doesn't mean that it was ready to be launched in other markets outside of Latin languages. So definitely doing your research on that. Some features products will be more tricky than others depending on what the functionality is. But even just building in, externalizing your strings, starting from there and talking to the localization team constantly about designing a product for a global audience is essential to making sure that it'll be far easier when you do want to launch. You don't even have to commit to doing the localization immediately, but by at least laying the base, it makes it possible, and the work will be a lot faster and efficient when you're ready to localize.
And you're not going to be pressed for time if you want to launch in several markets, maybe let's say in a month. You don't have to do the engineering and the localization. It's really challenging.
Absolutely. And then there's like, oh, you can't do it in a month. Why not? I was like, well, let me talk about the speed of localization and the amount of words that you have to translate.
Yeah, because that's one of the other things with the AI now being on everybody's mind. People might think that now it's just a click of a button and you get a software localized right away. And it's not really like that. As you said, like it's really complex. The context is super important. One single word can mean so many different things and can be translated in so many different ways. So yeah, absolutely. And if you had to give, let's say, one key piece of advice to a SaaS company that's just starting the global expansion journey, what kind of piece of advice would you give them when it comes to localization? If you had to give just one, you're allowed to give two if you want.
Well, I'm going to give two because I was actually going to say what we just touched on, and that is to internationalize your products from day one. Because as I said, it's cheaper than retrofitting it later. And it means you don't have to commit to localization, but you will be ready somewhat pretty close to getting ready for localization. But A second piece of advice would be to take the time to analyze your market opportunity and local competitor offerings before committing to launching localization effort. Do your homework first. Make sure this is a market that's going to be beneficial for you. There's a lot of nuances, as we know. India came to mind. In my mind, it's a commonly discussed market where people say, oh, maybe if we localize into Hindi, this will help our business. Like, okay, let's sit down and have a long chat. I don't need to talk about that because I'm preaching to the choir with our industry. But yeah, making sure that the time is taken to look at the opportunity. How does localization fit into that? What are local competitors doing? Are they even localizing these competitors as well before launching? Also looking at legal requirements and local regulations that sometimes may be a blocker as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because and especially every company is different from another. Like what worked for somebody might not work for you. And the competitor is a good example you gave. And in some cases, your competitor might not even be another company. If you're entering, let's say you're a SaaS product entering a market where that category, like that kind of product doesn't even exist, your competitor is maybe an Excel spreadsheet. So there's a different component as well on your, let's say, positioning strategy as well that might need to be adjusted. Your marketing maybe needs to be more educational so people actually understand that for doing that kind of thing, you can have a software that does that because they might not even be aware. While compared to, let's say, a market that is really very mature, there's a lot of competition. So you see everybody there as localized. You have to go in, you have to be localized. Otherwise, there's so many choices that the users are just going to go with the ones already available and there for some time. Yeah. And the last one before we wrap up, because I want to be mindful of your time schedule as well. Looking ahead, like how do you see AI further shaping the future of localization? Like, is there something specifically that you're really looking forward that maybe we're not there yet? Maybe you've already mentioned, but you're not there yet, but you're really looking forward to being able to do something with AI?
Yeah, I'm really excited about accessibility developments, actually, in terms of making content more accessible in other languages, but as well as making content more accessible to people with disability needs as well. We're seeing some great developments in areas such as dubbing and subtitling and captioning. And these are obviously crucial for making content accessible with people with disabilities, but as well as different languages. And it really enables us to reach a broader audience than ever before, but it makes life easier. So I'm really excited about AI supercharging our localization industry in terms of making everything just more accessible in general.
Yeah, I think that's a very positive note to close on. So thank you so much. It was such an interesting conversation. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help B2B SaaS companies grow in any language. Get in touch if you want to know more. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. If you want to support us, remember to give 5 stars to the podcast. See you next time.